Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Sell Your Vision. My name is Moti Elkaim, and I'm the host of this podcast. And as always, we have one goal in mind: to bring to you successful founders who have raised their round successfully and VC partners who will share insights on what they're looking for in terms of pitching from the other side of the table. And today we have Dieter Rappold with quite a fascinating story. He's the co-founder and CEO of Context SDK, and you're gonna know just in a second why his fundraising story is so unique. Dieter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Moti. Thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Okay, so Dieter, before we go into your magical fundraising story and how you were able to get the $4 million in seed funding for Context SDK, tell us a bit about the company for the audience who is listening. What is Context SDK all about?
Thank you. So, how would I describe it in terms of an elevator pitch? I would say we're an edge AI company, and we're in the space of intent detection. So, we collect more than 200 signals from the modern smartphone. And with the help of statistics and machine learning, we interpret that data to identify and detect the intent of a user at the beginning of a session. So that means if mobile apps integrate our SDK, they can easily train custom machine learning models that they pin to any certain prompt or flow in their app, whether it is the premium upselling or an in-app purchasing prompt or an onboarding flow or push notifications, and optimize those in terms of timing based on the real world context of a user. Because everything that we optimize in apps is based on the server side. And if we want to make apps now better, we have to bring more intelligence on the device side. And this is what we do.
Sounds fascinating. Okay, that's very cool. So, when we just kind of introduced ourselves to each other before we started the recording, you said, younger me 20 years ago would love to have such a podcast to learn how to prepare better for fundraising. So now I'm taking you 20 years later to the current you, and let's say you have now the ability to see a founder who he or she are approaching their fundraising meeting. They're a seed startup just like you, and you had to give them one point of advice. What would that point be?
The number one advice would be clarity. Because what we usually overestimate is the ability of people to process information. And most of the time, you have to do the heavy lifting and create as much clarity as possible so that you make sure that the core message sticks and resonates.
Oof. I love this one because, it's sometimes we're looking at VC partners, and I'm interviewing VC partners as well, and they're saying, look, everyone is looking at us as these cold, calculating, money-making machines, as if we can grasp and process information like no one else. But at the end of the day, we're just people. We want to get it. And I think the way you positioned it was so powerful. Just focus on clarity. Don't try to over impress. Don't feature dump your product. Just be clear. But it's not as easy as it sounds, right?
No, I think clarity is a form of art because most of us have a talent to focus on the irrelevant. So it is a form of art or something that is a very rare skill to be able to differentiate the relevant from the irrelevant, to be able to see the wood for the trees. And we all live in the age of hyper transparency. So all the information out there is accessible to everyone, and we are all victims of information overload.
Right.
And the question is, what do we do in that environment? And if you are, as a messenger, able to divide the relevant from the irrelevant and only present the relevant with structure and clarity, you make the job of your investor much easier, because your investor is in the space of pattern recognition. And as you know, one can spot patterns much easier if you provide a predefined structure.
Right.
And if you're just all over the place, you make it so much harder for your investor to do his job of pattern recognition and to find out if and why you're great.
I'm blown away with the way you are sharing information right now and your insights. And I'm not just saying it because you're a guest on the show. First with clarity, and then the pattern recognition and the ability to connect those two together. It's so critical. And I think especially for early stage founders, because in many cases, they just want to present the opportunity and how great the product is, and maybe early traction, and they just end up putting too much sugar in the tea, where they forget to dilute the unnecessary and focus only on the necessary information. That's
Um,
Go
that's
ahead,
that's
sorry.
that's true, and I think a challenge here, just to empathize again with the founder, right? Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the young first-time founder, and let's kind of empathize with the situation they are in. So they're on this journey. They made this leap of faith, and they're kind of jumping into this fear of the unknown. And no matter how convinced they are, and no matter how motivated they are, they have their moments of doubt, and their moments where they're losing their faith, and so on and so forth. So when they're in a situation when they are pushing hard to raise a round, they are also consciously or subconsciously looking for validation. They need this kind of validation to have a proof point that they are on the right track, that they are not completely wrong, although sometimes they feel that they are somehow wrong, because what they are doing is they're making things inherently different than the rest of the market is doing it. That's why
Right.
we're in the business of innovation. That's why we're building a startup. So you're in a situation where you crave this validation. So very often you find yourself in a situation where you are throwing out hooks and hooks and hooks, desperately hoping that someone will bite. And only if you reflect that, and if you're aware of that, you can provide, as a founder, containment for yourself to all those overwhelming feelings, so that you don't end up doing that unconsciously in a pitching session, because that's not what your investor is looking for. Your investor is not wanting to see a needy founder looking for validation.
And that validation, I'm sorry, this is incredible what you're sharing here. That validation, in the junction of validation and storytelling, or validation and pitching, once you are crossing that fine line, that's where the confusion starts. Because if you're coming in for validation, then you're missing the purpose.
Yes.
You're coming in for persuasion, for conviction, and I can see where the communication battle begins. And this is the critical point. And I'm so glad you tapped on it. The founders may lose the room.
Exactly, because in the end, my feelings for validation, they can be honest, and they're totally okay, and I'm allowed to have them, but I have to know where and how I deal with them. And if I am in a room pitching to an investor, I'm not looking for the validation of that investor. No, I am creating a situation, and I am framing and crafting a story that allows the investor to get validation that he thinks that I am and that this company is great. So it's the other way around.
Absolutely. Makes sense. And I'm assuming, hearing you, it's no surprise to me why you were so quick to raise your seed round from inception to completion, as you shared before. It was done in a pretty short period of time, and I can clearly see why now. I'd love to ask you another question. In terms, you spoke about the story, and I'd love to talk about the importance of storytelling.
Mhm.
Um, and how do you balance the story with the business objectives? I'd love to understand how you structured your pitch.
Mhm.
You don't have to kind of unveil all the data, but I'd love to understand the flow of your pitch and what made it so convincing.
The whole process, and what I shared with you before is that I basically was working on our investment memo and preparing the data room in the second half of May, so about 2 weeks. And we sent out our material and documents to about 20 VCs on the 3rd of June, and 2.5 weeks later, we had 3 term sheets on the table and made a decision and closed our round. So that was compared to many processes that I have seen incredibly easy. Because I know a couple of amazing, capable, extremely skillful founders who were fundraising for 5 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and had a hard time to close their round because after this kind of peak of the bubble 2021 and everything that happened in the aftermath of it, in the last, let's say, 2 years, we have faced one of the toughest fundraising environments in the last 10 years.
Right.
And I have seen in my role in my organization before Context SDK, I've been part of about 30 fundraising projects that I accompanied and helped out on. And I've seen, the whole stretch from very easy to very difficult. But you have to take into account that the reason why our process was kind of pretty short was that since last November until May, I had about 50 calls with VCs. So I did not have a cold start. I was we were lucky because we had inbound calls from VCs all around the globe, but I was taking 1 or 2 calls per week in the last couple of months. So based on that, I was building relationships, and it was kind of there were no big surprises.
Right.
So and that was one of the let's say foundations of the process, which is give them what they are expecting, but with a twist.
Hmm.
So because you have to achieve 2 things. We're in the space of risk assessment, risk investment. So people are investing a lot of money with very limited information in a short period of time. And the most important element that you need for that is trust.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, how do I create trust? At the same time, in risk investment, you're not selling bonds, right? So you
Right.
need to have something that gets people excited. So you have to bridge that paradox to create trust based on delivering what people expect, and at the same time get people super excited. And this is an interesting question, how to achieve that. And basically, how I do that is in the months before where I had 1 or 2 calls a week, I I would say every time I was telling that pitch, I changed a little bit. I tried this, I tried that. I was twisting it and tweaking it here and there. And I was just observing, how does it resonate? And after 50 calls, you know what resonates with the market. And you learn how these pieces fit together. And then after you did these 50 calls, you take these pieces, brush it nicely, put it together, frame it, bring it into order, and suddenly it looks like a perfectly laid out plan, but it is the
Work
final
in process.
result
Right.
of a process of 5 months where you were testing and iterating on every piece of information like 5 different times.
And that's key, because I work with a lot of founders and I help them with the storytelling and crafting the pitch, and we are creating the kind of the anchors, the framework for the pitch.
Mhm.
But I always tell them as well, look, you have the talk track, you don't have to memorize it, but you do have to learn from the pitches.
Mhm.
And like you said, not too many people are taking the time to go back to the pitch and try to see what went well and what went wrong. They're doing the pitch, it didn't work, okay, let's do the same pitch over and over again
Yeah.
until it's going to hit.
But
And there
that's
is no learning process.
but that's important because um, the question is, do you over identify with your pitch, or is the pitch a means to its end? So if I have insecurity in myself with my idea and my company, I over identify with my pitch. And if somebody does not resonate with my pitch, that creates too much fear. So I cannot accept that. I have to look away from that fact. But if I identify the pitch as a means to an end, to raise capital and to execute on what I'm convinced of, then I don't over identify with my pitch. I'm not ideological about my pitch. I work with what works.
That's beautiful. We are nearing the end of this session, and I have one key question to ask you, the last one. And that is, what is the toughest question you received during your fundraising process and how you went about it? And I know you said you were involved in this one and some more before. So if you can look at your history of fundraising, what was the most challenging question you got?
I think the most challenging questions are if investors dive deep on the motive, how you as a person are connected to that idea and that company.
Why
So
you? Right.
exactly, why you, why this technology, why this company in this market, and if I were a founder, I would take the most time to feel well grounded with that question, because you know, as I told you, there are some pieces of the puzzle where you can iterate and twist it and tweak it, but when you're at this core fundamental level of what is your purpose, why are you doing that, you cannot flip around.
And it has to be genuine, it has to be real.
Yes.
Yes. It's interesting. You know what? I started asking that question only in the second season of the podcast. I never asked the founders in the first season of it. And interestingly enough, every single founder so far have answered the same answer.
Really?
They all said the why you question is the most challenging one, because you know the numbers, you know the product, you know the market, you've practiced all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But when someone is diving into your guts right now and they're saying, okay, why you, Dieter? That is kind of it's a challenging question because you cannot be too salesy. You want to be genuine, but you also need to show your feet. And it's a very loaded question. And it's surprising and not surprising. And all three of you came up with the same answer.
Nice.
Dieter, that was absolutely fascinating. Seriously, I really enjoyed this conversation so much. And the way you articulated your answers, I'll go back to the beginning with clarity, really allowed me to understand the depth of your thought process and your approach to investor pitching. And I'm banking on that every single founder who's going to listen to the podcast is going to get a lot from this session. So I really want to thank you for sharing your insight today and wish you and the team at Context SDK tons of luck. I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
Thank you very much, Moti. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you so much for putting in the work to craft that and connecting founders over their crucial questions. Happy to contribute to that.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye bye.